So, welcome to the Chemists in Industry and Government webinar by the Royal Australian Chemical Institute Young Chemists Group. I'm Renata. I'm the chair of the Young Chemists Group in South Australia. So before we begin this event, I just want to do an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting all around Australia. We recognise the elders past, present and emerging, and also recognise their contributions as Australia's first scientists and engineers. So for those who aren't familiar with the Young Chemists activity in SA, among other things, we typically run an annual in-person live panel around October. And this event typically aims to give an overview of the different career opportunities in chemistry in SA, both academic and non-academic. But we thought that we'd take advantage of the fact that events have shifted to an online format due to COVID, of course. So we're hosting this Zoom webinar as an additional event this year to showcase the diversity of chemistry nationwide. And conversations that I'm hearing more often are that people wish to broaden their horizons beyond academia. So today's panel is going to focus on careers outside of academia. And we're joined today by some excellent panelists, Nadia, Kim, Tom, and Daniel, and our wonderful panel moderator, Nathan. There'll be an opportunity for questions during the last 15 minutes or so of the event. To ask a question, just type it in the Q&A bit of Zoom, and I believe you can sort of like or upvote questions. So if you see one that you also want to know the answer to, then yeah, like it, and we'll make sure that they are addressed first. So I'm going to hand over to Nathan now, who'll briefly introduce himself, followed by introductions from our panelists, and then we can kick off the discussion. So over to you, Nathan.
Thanks, Renata. Hello, everybody listening. My name's Nathan Atwood. I happen to be loosely related to chemistry. My partner was a PhD candidate along with Renata at Flinders in South Australia. And so I've been helping out with some of the moderating of the panels, including the event that was staged last year, or the year before that, I should say. From me, you're going to get a couple of questions that will be a little naive with the chemistry and the actual science, and will be focused more on the career pathways that everybody here is interested in listening to today. So with that said, I will not be butchering the introductions of everybody's specialties, and I'll be handing over to our panelists individually. So I'll ask each of the panelists to go through just one after the other, and perhaps we could start with Tom, I think. So Tom, over to you to begin with.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks RACI for the opportunity to come and talk to everybody. My name's Tom Cresswell. I'm a research scientist at Australia's Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, or ANSTO, in southwest Sydney. My background is marine biology, marine chemistry. I currently work, and that was all done in the UK, but I currently work as an environmental toxicologist using nuclear techniques. So I dabble in nuclear physics and environmental chemistry and a bit of biology, and mix them together to understand how pollution impacts animals and plants in our waterways, from fresh waterways all the way to the ocean.
Thanks very much for that, Tom. Can we have Kim next?
Hey, well, I've been on a trajectory to become a food technologist for many years, but very recently I took a little bit of a turn, and although I've always been an applied chemist, I wouldn't have thought that I would have entered the circular economy at the end of the food chain rather than earlier in the food chain. So I'm a food technologist that's just accepted a role in grey water recycling industry. And I'm certainly already in after my first week and a bit, I'm very much back into chemistry again. So really great to be along and answer any questions. You can never let go of the science that you've learned. and it's a great opportunity to share my pathway with everyone today.
Thanks very much, Kim. Can we have Daniel next?
Yeah. So my background's obviously in chemistry, but I'm probably amongst the group a bit of a failed chemist. I've only spent a brief period working as a true chemist. My first job was in metallurgy, and then I went back to do a PhD, and then jumped into engineering. So I've spent probably about the last 15 years masquerading as an engineer.
And finally, from Nadia.
Hi everyone. I work in a wine bottling facility in the laboratory as part of the technical team. So I work as an analytical chemist dealing with methods and instrumentation mostly. I also do dabble in microbiology because we do have both a chemistry and a microbiology component to our laboratory. I personally deal more with things like NADA accreditation, instrument maintenance, validation, repairs, and then things to do with NADA accreditation and auditing, a lot of paperwork style, more side of the chemistry and the regulatory science.
Thanks for that, Nadia. As today we're talking about work outside of the academic field, I was wondering if you could kick us off with how you got your first job, because you've just mentioned that you are a bit of a dabbler. Was it a direct pathway into chemistry in wine, or was it a bit of a movement before you landed where you are?
My first job in chemistry would probably be my current role, as I've been working in my position for the last 6 years, whereas I've only just recently graduated from my degree last year. So I've started my job in a basic lab technician role, and I've actually worked up through, started studying and continued on into a technical position, dealing more of the technical problem solving side of the laboratory.
A convoluted pathway.
Yes.
Finally got there. I think on the flip side of that, perhaps Tom, you could share with us how you got your first job. You appeared to be a bit more direct and still quite related to the academic field. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd say so, Nathan. I guess similar to an academic researcher within the university sector, but I work for the federal government. This job that I have at ANSTO is my first real science job, but I've had a very convoluted path to get there. I started my undergraduate in 2000 in the UK, and then bummed around for a year, and after the undergrad did a master's after that in the UK in applied marine science. And then I had 4 years off traveling the world. I sailed across the Pacific, ended up in New Zealand. I did a summer teaching sailing and 2 winters working on a ski field, so nothing to do with science at all. And then I moved to Australia to do a PhD with CSIRO and RMIT University. So I originally took on the PhD thinking I like teaching because I enjoy teaching sailing. I like science, so I'll stay in academia and will be a lecturer, and that'll be fun. And then because I was working with CSIRO mainly, I discovered the government side of research, which was I guess a little, I don't know if it's a bit more autonomy, but there's no teaching, there's still student supervision in there. But it was a great pathway, and I just lucked out that I managed to be finishing my PhD at the same time as somebody was retiring from ANSTO, and managed to slot in before I'd submitted my thesis. So I was pretty happy there.
And you've travelled around a fair bit, Tom. Were there many challenges with either moving within the countries or moving intercontinental that you'd like to share with us that you overcame?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and certainly not the kind of challenges that people would be facing right now in 2020 due to COVID. Trying to get a student position, or do a PhD or even an undergraduate overseas at the moment would be a real nightmare, and it would all have to be done online, I guess. So I guess from going from New Zealand to here, to Australia, it was relatively straightforward. Lots of paperwork. I had to get academic transcripts faxed over from or scanned in from the UK, dug up in an attic somewhere and then sent over. They all had to be signed by a notary public and people like that in order to prove that they were real. So there was a bit more of a hassle in doing that. But I think in terms of integrating into Australia and the academic systems are pretty similar. It's certainly more enjoyable to live here than it is in the UK, especially at the moment, I think. So yeah, it was a really nice opportunity to be able to come and study over here and eventually then work here and be able to get residency and dual citizenship.
Oh, congratulations. And Daniel, you've also travelled a fair bit looking for work and through various roles. Is that an experience that you've shared with moving intercontinental? And is there anything that you wish you'd known before you started that would have set you up to have a better experience?
Yeah, so I did all my study in Perth. Then I started with a multinational engineering company, so a consultancy, and they shipped me over to London, where I lived, all expenses paid for 12 months as an expat. So I was sort of selected there was 300 engineers on the project, but for some reason they picked the only chemist that worked for the company to ship over to London. And nothing, just the only experience I got that was fantastic. It was like the best year of my life. So I can, no, that was, can't really say there was anything I missed out on. Or, the only thing I would say is that you either go over single with a very understanding partner, because it can be tough for the other person if you're sort of working on a big LNG project with long hours and things, and they're sort of stuck at home while you're not there. Then I moved back to Australia. I moved to Melbourne. Spent a disastrous 3 months there, and then ran back to a resource state, and so now I'm in Queensland. But I think the thing about especially going on to a PhD is it's a double-edged sword. Some people will take you for I guess an entry-level job or a lower-level job, but then when people see your specialisation, sometimes they're a bit reluctant to take you on as a general chemist or which is a bit. So I think my advice would be, if you're going to do a PhD and go into industry, have 2 CVs. One has your PhD on it, and the other one doesn't.
I can agree with that. Being in a different field, my undergrad's in accounting and finance, and that's a similar thing. You can get pigeonholed very quickly with your specialisations from honours and masters, and I don't have personal experience with the PhD, but yes, that's common across industries. With the PhD, how important is it in the industry that you perhaps started with and the industry that you're in now?
So I didn't start. So I worked for about 2.5 years, and then I sort of did my PhD out of spite, which is, I don't know if that's good motivation, but I was working with a whole lot of metallurgists, and they said, I was getting paid less because I was a chemist. And I said, well, I've got a 4-year degree. They've got a 3-year degree. And I said, the stuff I did my honours in is directly, So I marched into the general manager's office, put my honours thesis down. They had a couple of publications on my belt, and I said, I don't want more than them. I just want the same. So he sort of had he said, you'll go far, and gave me my pay rise. I walked out with a pay rise, and then so that was in metallurgy. I went back to do a PhD in water treatment through the Water Corporation, water utility in Perth. And so I was all geared up to get into the water industry proper, but that didn't work out that way. And I ended up going sort of heavily into mining and oil and gas. So the PhD, probably not necessary for my earlier career, but in the later career, it's probably not necessary, but it does add some impact. And some of the things that you're doing at a sort of a national or international level, I'd say out of all the people I've met who do PhDs, we just write really well. So the documentation that we produce is a cut above, and look, when you spend 3 years essentially reading at that level and writing at that level, you just absorb it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, Kim, is that a shared experience for yourself with the importance of the PhD in the food industry. And what other skills should any of the students listening also be trying to develop for themselves?
Okay, so I wasn't awarded my PhD. I got booted right at the end, but you know, I learned the lessons of the PhD. It was all written up. So it was like a bit of a bad ending, but my first job in the food industry after I finished the PhD program was in a small factory, which was very interesting. I was an operator for a short while, and that in the years since, and all of the other roles since, have been valuable experience for me to give empathy to the other workers. So it might be deviating a little bit from your question, Nathan, but I think it's really important, even if it's not the job that you want, that you learn more skills from each of the jobs, even though you're just looking at the wall and it's like, why am I doing this? This is just crazy. So it actually ended up being 10 years from when I thought I was going to be employed as a food technologist that I finally had that role offered to me, and I went to Griffith from Sydney and had a lovely couple of years down there, learnt so much, and then came back to Sydney for a much more significant role, and you know, wonderful opportunities. And I think it's the network that you develop as you have different employers that's so important, because there's a lot of people that you'll remember in the future that were just a building block on your career. And don't forget, you can always negotiate with your employers for what you want, and it's really important. Just like Daniel stepped into that office to say, you know, hey, this is what I want. Yeah, you can't always negotiate with your employers, but it's really important to remember that as a negotiating chip. And also traveling to Griffith was a wonderful experience. So if you're from in town and you get the opportunity to go to the country, it's just absolutely wonderful if the opportunity arises. So
is the biggest bargaining chip that you have negotiating with employers your technical skills and, you know, the paperwork that you've got for various degrees and qualifications, or are there other skills that you can use to negotiate really what the role that is that you want to have with an employer?
It really depends. Sometimes they're just desperate for someone, which puts you in a really good negotiating position, and also an opportunity to dictate what you want to do. So yeah, obviously having some qualifications are really good, but I've usually put my experience as a postgraduate postgraduate research on my resume, and that doesn't seem to make people think, oh, she can't do a techie job. Nobody's actually ever asked at an interview what my postgraduate research was all about, unless I've brought it up myself. So yeah, I think you just downplay it, but if it's relevant to the role, then you do mention what you've done.
Nathan, can I add something to that?
Sure.
Yeah, I think from my experience, I mentioned earlier that I had a break in between doing my master's and the PhD, and that ended up being 4 years, of which I didn't do any science there. And I know that before I had done that, I was getting having conversations with academics at my former university in the UK saying, you know, if you do take time off, it should only be 3 months or 6 months. Otherwise, you're going to make yourself unemployable, and it's going to be tricky if you're out. You know, you're out of the game, out of the science or the chemistry game. And yet I had an opportunity to sail across the Pacific, which only comes up once in a lifetime. And so I took that opportunity, and I ended up, remember vividly when I was applying for a PhD here in Australia, that I had a conversation, I had an external supervisor, an independent consultant, so not an academic, who had a PhD, but he was part of the project, and my project was on a gold mine in Papua New Guinea. So it was up in the mountains and the jungles, and there was field work involved. And on my CV, I had mentioned that I have skills in improvisation and resilience because I've crossed the Pacific and bits of the boat have broken and we've had to fix them with bits of tape and whatever. And he said that for him, normally he doesn't care about the extracurricular stuff, it's the academic things, but he noticed that that was in my CV, and that actually gave him confidence to say, I know that if I take Tom up to the jungle and, you know, the helicopter lands and he's out in the middle of the jungle, he's A, not going to freak out, and B, that if something breaks or he doesn't have the right equipment, he's going to be able to improvise and try and make the most out of it. And so that lived experience, the non-academic lived experience, then ended up actually benefiting me. So I'm always encouraging people that if you're unsure about what it is that you want to do, it might not be the easiest thing to do culturally or within the family, but to be able to take some time out and find yourself, go and find some, you know, go and live and experience the things that are out there that might told me what I don't want to do. Which then led me to work out what it is that I do want to do. So I think sometimes those extracurricular skills can be really important.
Yeah, I can definitely echo those sentiments. I've just returned from 12 months overseas myself, where my partner and I trekked across America on the Pacific Crest Trail. And for anybody who's seen the movie A Walk in the Wilderness with Reese Witherspoon, that's that trail. And returning from that trip, my partner was able to secure a postdoctorate role at the University of Sydney. And so, yeah, that can absolutely happen. She was in the final year of her PhD and is just finishing it off now. So lived experience for sure. And it's really powerful to have experience in different disciplines because you're never quite sure where you'll end up. And I think, Nadia, you were definitely talking about that to begin with, that the path that we set off on to begin with isn't necessarily where we end up. I was wondering, Nadia, if you could delve more into the experiences that you had in other fields and how you were able to talk about those skills that you've got to move into a more chemistry-focused role.
So that was a very creative path that I took to get there. I initially started probably coming out of high school, moving into hospitality, and then eventually moving into hospitality management. I thought that's where I was heading in life until I came to the realization that I'm not an ideal customer-facing service kind of role person. I disliked that portion of my job. So I went into, what am I going to do? Because I can't keep doing this. And I thought, I live in the Barossa Valley. I'm surrounded by wine. Can I get into the wine industry? And of course, I had parents and other people who worked in the wine industry, and all of them told me, don't do it. Don't do it. Whatever you do, it's hard. It's heavy lifting. You won't like it. So I went back and decided I'm going to go look at TAFE courses. I actually signed up for a TAFE course in lab techniques and then ended up turning around and my parents went, well, actually, that's not a bad idea, and actually got me in doing some work experience with a wine lab, which then ended up turning into a job at another wine lab, which was supposed to be a 4-week stint. And now here I am 10 years later and I'm still there. And then that's kind of transitioned on to, all right, I can't keep doing the shift work because family and lifestyle changes. What am I going to do? And it's like, okay, I'm going to do a degree and I'm going to take this to the next level and sign up for my chemistry degree. And then start stepping into a role that's more aligned with that degree and kind of just keep stepping my way up. And here I am now in a technical role with my degree completed, and it's now, what's next? Where do I go from here? I don't know. But it's all very fluid, which seems to be a general trend with everyone. everything just kind of flows.
Yeah, I agree. Some opportunities can come up, particularly from the likes of doing placements and work experience, internships, whatever you want to call them. Would you say that that's one of the most important sort of contributors to not necessarily where you ended up, but just opportunities presenting?
Yes, because a lot of opportunities come up that aren't necessarily advertised. They don't necessarily go through the traditional job application seek channels. It's the position that I got was someone suddenly quit, and the manager of that laboratory went, "Oh no, I've got a flood of people leaving on maternity leave," and started ringing around to their friends in other businesses. "Do you know anyone?" And of course, the person that I did the work experience through turned around and said, "I've got a name." And I got cold called. "Do you want to come in and work?"
Yeah.
And here I am.
That's fantastic. Does anybody else on the panel have a similar story or an experience through a placement or work experience they'd like to also share?
I won't say where I went, but I did. A friend said, you know, hey, yep, my partner works for this company. Would you like to come out for a few days and see what they do in their lab? And it was so boring. I decided I'd never wanted to be a techie, and so that was the best 3 days I ever spent. So if you've got a chance, you know, we've got a friend that will let you into their lab for a few days, and you can see what's going on. You can really make some very, very good life decisions with that experience. Other labs I've been to that I've loved, so maybe I just won't put the line through any techie job, but yeah, that was a really, really good experience for me.
Daniel and Tom, anything to add on that one?
I've been on the other end where I've employed people, so I've plucked people. It's all, you know, everyone talks about it, but it's about relationships. So I've pulled people from academia, from other jobs, to come work with me because I know that I can trust them. And but there was that underlying relationship beforehand. So the idea is to try and get out there, you know, do things like this. If when we're allowed to meet in person again, or even just online, you know, reach out to people and just ask them, you know, and you know, I've found internships for engineers. You know, so if you know somebody, you've got a much better chance of finding a position, even if it's just an internship or unpaid work. You know, you can say, look, I know such and such. Can they give me a hand? My dentist, I got an internship for my dentist's daughter. I'm in the chair, and he goes, "You're in engineering, aren't you?" And yeah, right. And he said, "Oh, my daughter needs a placement. Can you help me out?" "Oh, yeah." He's got sharp implements in my mouth, so of course I'm going to help him out. But you know, she ended up, and then you know, she spent about 6 weeks with me, and then went on to work for Deloitte. You know, she did she's doing really well. But you know, and I get free dental now because he always says, "Look, thanks for what you did for my daughter," because you know that was the door that opened up that got her the experience. Your first job's always going to be the hardest job. So you know, the minute that if somebody else has taken a punt on you, everyone else now wants you. You're a wanted asset.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Actually,
Tom, we might
Nathan,
shift.
I might just have a little bit to add to that, and this is something that Nadia, I'm sure, also experienced. The jobs before you get your professional job, when you've been working in hospitality or retail, again, you're like, oh, I'm at university, I'm just working in retail, so it's money, or I'm working in hospitality because it's money. But it does give you really valuable skills, just like a PhD, I guess, that if you could bring up in an interview if you thought was relevant, and that they are important skills to have. So I can't dismiss those.
You know, I drove a ute 2 days a week during my undergrad, and you know, so it took me 5.5 years to do a 4-year degree. But you know, I could pull on that. You know, somebody had employed me, so obviously I had some work skills, as well as you know, when I finished my degree, I had a piece of paper that said I was competent in other things as well. So it was you're less of a risk to a potential employer.
I'll move across to back to Tom now. What was the main driving force for you choosing more industry focus than academia itself?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And as I mentioned earlier, I went in to do when I did my undergrad, it was because it was ocean science. I'd always lived by the sea. It was something that I loved to do. I wasn't ready to go out and get a job, so I figured I'd get some debt and do a degree. And then it was a similar sort of thing to doing a master's. My partner at the time went back to university to do a teaching degree, and I thought, I'm not ready to go and get a real job yet, so I'll go and do a master's. And then after as I said, when I was signing up for the PhD, it was with the intention of staying in academia, and it was then through working with CSIRO and ANSTO during my PhD and seeing the opportunities that were there in government research that led me to think, okay, well, actually, I can do research outside of an academic institution, still collaborate with people within that area, but not have to be based there. And I think ultimately it was just, like I mentioned, it was the right place, right time. I was 6 months out from submitting my PhD thesis before when this opportunity at ANSTO came up. So I hadn't started yet looking for postdoc opportunities. It was on my mind because I was here in the country as an overseas student, and my partner who's also from overseas. She's from Ireland. She was on my visa as well, so we were both contingent on what happens after the PhD. And to be honest, there's an opportunity here with the Australian government who are going to support us through a 457 visa and then residency, and I get to do research, and we get to stay in the area that we've just been in. So I didn't even think twice about going out and looking for other opportunities. And I think one of the biggest things there was that I got a lot of advice from my colleagues within CSIRO and academia as well to work out what, is this the right step? Is this the right place to go, or should I be looking to go into academia? And the resounding call was yes, absolutely. These positions only come up very infrequently. So it's and I'm glad that I did. So there's no kind of silver bullet there other than being, I guess, in the right place at the right time, albeit I would say, again, echoing the other panelists, saying that this type of forum, being a part of a professional society, has opened up lots of doors for me, whether it's through RACI, through CTAC, through Science and Technology Australia. I've met a lot of people as a student who I'm now co-supervising students with, co-supervising PhD students with. So it's don't underestimate the benefits that you can get from these sorts of professional societies like RACI.
Yeah, thank you. We've covered a lot of topics so far on, what to do to get yourself in a better position, how to, whether you choose industry or academia or just serendipitous luck. What's the advice that you give when your PhD students that you're co-supervising ask for career advice?
Yeah, when they ask for advice, that's a tough one as well. I think I say the same thing. I try to give them opportunities to, I guess, have a broad experience during their PhD, and in one sense, a PhD is all about focusing and picking that niche area. But at the same time, you can do it multidisciplinary. So, for example, environmental toxicology and chemistry has aspects of physics, chemistry, and biology. So I'm certainly not a die-hard chemist. I get to use lots of different bits to it to apply to a specific scenario. And that, I think, because of having those opportunities of doing getting lots of experience with different analytical techniques or fieldwork techniques, then broadened my opportunities going forward. So that's what I try to do with my students, as well as making sure. So I'm supporting a student at the moment with a Fulbright application, which is to go and study for 4 to 6 months in the US as part of her PhD. And this is through a collaboration that we've developed over the last couple of years with a lab over there. that will open up a lot of doors for her, as well as look good on her CV at the end of the day. So yeah, it's I think again broadening network has been key that I've found works really well.
Yeah, the importance of scholarships is paramount for many students that are looking to move overseas, I think, and interstate. And Fulbright do a fantastic job, from what I understand, with that. Of the panelists, I think Daniel, Kim, and Tom, you're all involved with the RACI formally as mentors. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. What has been your experience through that? Would you echo the sentiments mostly that Tom just shared?
It's been mixed. I'm currently paired with somebody who's not been in touch so much. So we got paired up, I think, late last year or early this year, and I've had, I think, one email back and haven't had a huge amount of interaction there. So that's just how that is, and I can understand that people's situations have changed significantly over this current period as well. Previous to that, I was paired with somebody locally here in Sydney, and we met up a couple of times for coffee, and then met up over Zoom, I think once a fortnight, and that was really good. It was nice to be able to offer some advice academically, but then also personally as well, about options for moving away from home state in order to go and study or to work, or taking opportunities overseas. I see that there's a question in the Q&A box about moving interstate and overseas, so maybe we'll get to that a bit later. But yeah, I think been positive, and especially things like this, open forums like this, I think are really useful.
Yeah, I've had 3 years of mentoring, and 3 very different arrangements. The first one was an undergraduate doing food tech who had an environmental science degree background. We met and talked about what her aims were, and that we ticked the boxes on all of her hopes. And she's in a role, her dream role, well, one of her dream roles now. So the second group were actually a husband and wife, and they're, I believe, finished their studies now, and I'm very excited to hear what they're going to do next. They got lots of placements for their degree at Deakin in food tech. I don't know whether they're on. So that they're just they also achieved all of these extra things. So not just doing uni and passing uni, but also things away from school, I guess you say. And they've got a huge amount out of that. And I've got a third mentee at the moment, and yes, we haven't been in contact so much, but we've tossed around a few different ideas, because that when you're finishing a PhD, you're really forming what you want to be as a scientist, and where you want to go from there, whether you want to head into being serious or whether you want to do something a little bit lighter. So someone who's finishing a PhD, don't think that it's going to be the same kind of full-on stuff. Like, you can change at any stage in your scientific life, I guess you say. So yeah, it's been really great being involved in the mentoring program. Lots of different people involved, and it's been really good for me as a mentor. Good for the mentees too, I believe.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Kim. And Daniel, what's your experience been with the mentorship? And perhaps you could also share, for those of us that don't know, the process of going through and finding a mentor and finding a mentee.
This is actually my first year, and I'm a bit like Tom. My mentee's gone AWOL, so we caught up just once. I followed up with him 2 weeks later. I sort of said to him, I gave him some advice on how to get his name out there, start making connections and things. And then, yeah, unfortunately since COVID, he's sort of he's disappeared over the horizon on a horse. So I don't know where he is. So that's sort of my experience. Was a bit unfortunate, but I'm still all ears. I'm just waiting for him to get back to me. The process was pretty simple, actually. I basically just put my hand up and said, I'm probably at a stage where I might be able to offer some, valuable advice or some insight, and we were matched up. So other than the interim outcome, it's not done yet. Yeah, it was all fairly smooth. So, but we did meet prior to COVID and had a good chat. He was into extracurricular activities that I was into as well, so that was good. We had a fair bit in common, and he was really just sort of focused on getting his first job. So as I said, my advice to him was to get yourself out there. So there's lots of avenues. He was an international student, and so I said, look, you need to get in touch with as many people as you can before you finish up your degree. So I think you have about 6 months left.
There we go. Renata, are you able, have you got audio at the moment, or Dave, are you able to allow Renata to just give some advice from the mentee point of view?
From a mentee point of view?
Yes.
I haven't been involved in the mentoring program. Maybe Dave can shed some light.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I've literally got a lolly in my mouth. Let me just quickly join here. Look, I'm horrified to hear that we've got mentees who aren't contacting their mentors. This puts me to shame, and I'm not looking red in this for accidentally. I'm feeling quite embarrassed here, everybody. Normally, our mentoring program is this wonderfully successful program. We have had over 100 mentees going through the program, and on average, about 90% of them graduate with a job already waiting for them. Their employment outcomes are so much better than the national average. We give them great training. They develop fabulous relationships. The relationship with Kim Staples was a poster example of just how well it can work. Kim didn't say that her mentee, won a national competition in the food tech area. She won a trip to Paris. There was all these awards, all these great things, great outcomes happened. As of now, we are in almost every state in Australia. We're just still reaching out to Tasmania, and the mentoring program will open up for recruitment in the next couple of weeks. So we'll be taking on people for 2021. Tom and Daniel, I hope to give you a much better experience as a mentor if you're willing to come back next year, because normally it works a whole lot. But I can only say COVID is messing with everybody this year, and it's messing with the mentoring program just as much as everything else. So I'll duck back out again now.
Thanks very much for that, Dave. Perhaps we could share some information with the group afterwards on how to sign up to that program. So unless anybody from the panel has anything to add to that last piece there, I'll move into some of the questions from the Q&A. Now, if anybody on the panel has a question that they'd particularly like to address straight up, perhaps you could mention that now. Otherwise, I'll just throw one open to the group.
I'm happy to take the second question there on the Q&A about moving interstate overseas. So the question was, would love to hear more about moving interstate overseas. How did you weigh up moving and getting a job that you wanted versus staying with family and friends, working a job you didn't like so much? I think that is a really good question, Anonymous. It's certainly something that I've reflected on and have been asked in the past, being the fact that all of my family and my partner's family are on the other side of the planet, which at the moment is very difficult to get to. So we couldn't have moved further away for our jobs. And in fact, I was very fortunate that my partner moved with me from New Zealand to Australia for my PhD. So she was very supportive in that sense, and moved here and then we've both started a life here, I guess. The other thing is we've, especially now with COVID, we've just had our second child. So she was born on the 18th of March, just as everyone was going into lockdown. And so we've not been able to have grandparents out who were planning to come out and help us out, and you know, haven't had that support. So that has been really tough, and certainly very recent as well. And it is difficult being away from all you know, childhood friends and all of my family and my partner's family as well. But I think on reflection, we both look at it and see that the opportunities for employment in our sectors, my partner's in the energy sector, are better here than they are in Europe. Or certainly was the case sort of 7, 8, 9 years ago when we got started our careers up. I think also the way of life here in Australia has been is a bit more enjoyable from my perspective, my personal perspective, than in the UK. So yes, it's difficult being so far away from family and friends, but I think, and especially with us now having a young family, but I think that we weigh up the fact that we've got a lot more opportunity here, and our kids will probably have a lot more of an opportunity as well. You know, we live in southern Sydney, close to the beaches and the national park, and it's a wonderful place to for them to grow up, for our kids to grow up. So yeah, it's certainly something that's worth thinking about. Looking back on it, I wouldn't change it for a second. It's been a great experience, and I think especially coming from the UK to Australia is relatively straightforward, very similar systems and ways of doing things on main.
Thanks very much for that, Tom. Anybody else like to address their Q&A questions?
There's one question there on getting a job in a different discipline. So I wouldn't limit yourself to even a science discipline. One of the best things about chemistry is it's honestly one of the best degrees you can do. I keep in touch with some of the people that I went through, you know, as an undergrad and even with PhD, and the scope of the jobs that people are working in is just phenomenal. I mean, even amongst the panelists here, you know, we're all in completely different areas. So don't limit yourself to chemistry jobs. You know, you're a scientist. You specialize in chemistry, but you know, there's other bits. You know a hell of a lot more than you think you know when you go out there and start working. And as I said, you know, I fell into a role where I was working with 3,000 engineers in a company in Australia. I was the only chemist. And I will say one thing, that not having to compete with 3,000 other chemists meant that I was the best chemist in the company, in the country. So that did a lot for my career, in that, you know, I became a subject matter expert and was sort of acknowledged well above what I should have been. You know, I'm all right. I can show you my academic record. It's not stunning. But I think it's a bit like, if you've ever seen The Matrix, you know, Neo, he sees things that no one else can see. So, you know, we'd have 10 engineers sitting at a table and me, and they'd all see the same thing, and I'd see the problem. They couldn't see the problem that I could see because of my training and my background. So, yeah, definitely reach out for any role that you're interested in. And yeah, you've got a degree behind, you know, under your belt, but I mean, it's taken you 3 years. You know, when you get to my age, 3 years isn't a hell of a lot of time. You know, I've learned a lot. You know, I've learned engineering. I've learned process flow diagrams. You know, PNIDs, single line diagrams. I can talk to electrical engineers. I didn't learn any of that. I learned all that on the job. So don't limit yourself just to a career in chemistry. Chemistry is going to be the thing that backs you up, but it's really limitless.
Yeah, and Nadia, your experience is probably from the other angle, following an interest and then developing the science as a formal degree afterwards.
Yes, so a lot of the skills and knowledge and what I've learned throughout my degree, not all of that is actually applicable in my job. So there's a lot of other things where troubleshooting, instrumentation, digging in and pulling a machine apart is not something they teach you in an undergrad degree, because frankly, you're not allowed to touch the instruments. And if you started pulling them apart, you'd probably get in a bit of trouble. But that's something that you learn on the job, because when something breaks, you need to fix it. And that's when you get the opportunity to sit there and pull it apart, because frankly, it's not working anyway. And it's also important because I did my degree through the University of New England. They are based 6 hours away from Sydney. So one thing that they also had issues with was getting a service technician out was not an easy feat. So they had to do a lot of their own on-site repairs as well. Because getting a service technician out when you're 6, 12, 18 hours from a major city, especially in industries like mining, you know, that's thousands and thousands of dollars. So it's always good to just get in there with your screwdrivers and your hex keys and start pulling stuff apart. And that's where, you know, you've got your chemistry, but that's getting more into your mechanical, engineering, other things which you learn. And then you've got the other aspects like your regulatory, where NATA accreditation, they don't necessarily teach you that as part of undergrad degree chemistry. They touch on quality control, but it's not reinforced to the degree that you need in an industry, such as wine industry, where it's regulated.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. One of the other questions that we've got is around moving from overseas to start a career in Australia. I think, Tom, you've probably got the most direct experience to address that question. Do you want to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I guess this was, from what I gather, an international student studying here, doing a Master of Chemistry and wants to get involved in the chemistry field within Australia. I think without understanding the specific circumstances, I can't comment with too much detail, but I guess I would say that it's trying to look for those opportunities of doors opening, get onto recruitment specialists. There was in the recent camaraderie that was done a couple of months ago, I was talking to a scientific recruitment specialist, and that's what they do, is they're placing people. They're part of RACI, or at least the forum, so certainly that Renata or Dave would be able to put them in touch with those sorts of people. I think as well, yeah, just asking around the faculty that you're in as well, and other people that you might be working with during your masters, trying to work out what are the other opportunities that are here for me. I certainly though agree with both Daniel and Nadia that just because you're doing a specific flavor of chemistry doesn't mean that you can't branch out into another flavor of chemistry or even another area of science, and often that can be really beneficial. So it's, I guess, thinking outside the box of the traditional academic roles that may be there, or technical roles that may come through, and thinking about what other areas might your skill set be applicable to. And it's also, I think, you know, that's where it's a really useful exercise building a CV. And before I started my PhD, I used to have a skills-based CV. So it wasn't necessarily, here's my experience and my education, my work experience and my education. It was, these are the skills that I have, analytical skills, and here's the examples of how I've proven those. Here are my troubleshooting skills, and here are the different lived examples or academic examples that I've got. And that way it's a good exercise to help you think about, okay, well, how could I actually transfer these skills to something else outside that? So hopefully that's a bit helpful.
I was wondering, when you first moved to Australia, how you understand where to look for jobs to begin with. Was the CSIRO something that you knew about before you moved to Australia, and how did you find out about places?
Yeah, that's a great question, and absolutely not. I wasn't aware of the CSIRO. You know, now I'm aware that they're a huge government research organisation, but no, at the time I wasn't. So all I did when I was looking for a PhD, I was in New Zealand working on the ski field, so I would have to go down to the internet cafe at the end of the day and be on Google to look for, and I basically started looking for academics at Australian and New Zealand universities who were doing research that was similar to what I'd done in the past, some sort of environmental chemistry and toxicology that had a similar interest. And I just would email them my CVs and say, I'm looking for PhD opportunities, have you got any? And it was then through that I linked into another network, and they then passed on and said, oh, this might be of interest. And so actually when I was starting, I was planning to try to get a PhD in New Zealand, but this was 2008. The global financial crisis was hitting and people were withdrawing funding for international scholarships. So I ended up having a look over here in Australia. So it's a strange series of events. I think I just try and encourage people to be really proactive and positive and think about what is it that you can offer a potential employer or a supervisor for a research program that's outside of the very specifics of what you've learned during your degree.
It's interesting that you speak about the global financial crisis of 2008. I'm sure there's a lot of corollaries that we can draw to the, especially in academia, for what we're going through at the moment in the Australian economy.
Absolutely, yeah, tough times, no, for sure.
Yeah. I'll read out the next question and leave it open to the group from an anonymous attendee. If I'm in a position that makes me strongly want to leave my PhD, would I be better off sticking with it or trying to get some industry experience? And if I left, would it put a cap on my career in terms of research?
I'd like to jump in just really quickly and say, I would be asking, what is it that wants to make you leave the PhD? If it's some academic, and you don't have to answer, but just if it's some academic pressure or you're not getting on with your supervisor, which I've had quite a few occasions with where there's just a clash of personalities, there are support mechanisms within universities that should help with that. They're not always the best, and in my experience, those support mechanisms tend to favor the tenured academics, unfortunately, rather than the students. But I would encourage you, if that's the situation that makes you want to leave a PhD, reach out and try to find some support about getting another supervisor or finding somebody else to help out, because you've devoted yourself and you've made the decision that this is what you want to do, and so that's try to complete that. If it's the fact that you're really you're finding this isn't for me and I'm really not enjoying it, then absolutely, I think time to look for another avenue. Would it put a cap on it? I guess it really depends on what role it is that you're going into next, and maybe Daniel can comment on that from his experience.
I think the question was specifically, would it put a cap on research?
Yeah, I guess from my experience, it depends. Again, if it's more aligned with that academic research side, then yes, it probably would do. But then there are avenues that are available for non-PhDs to get into research. It's just a little bit more tricky, I would say.
Yeah, I've got a lot of friends who didn't do a PhD. One guy dropped out of his honours year and went on to work for CSIRO, and he worked for CSIRO for many years, and now he works in still a research role, but for Rio Tinto. So I would say, no, it's not going to put a cap on it, but it will direct you in another avenue. If you've got your heart set on becoming an academic, you basically need a PhD. So that's your ticket to ride, if you like. But that doesn't mean that you can't do research. I've done research projects, but they're much more applied, but still, been able to use the skills I learned while doing a PhD and still doing research.
As a person that has gone through I feel the full rigor of a PhD program and then not received the PhD at the end, yes, I'll agree that to have an academic position, obviously that would be cut off. However, personally, as a scientist, I felt that I answered the questions that I had on my PhD project. So that project was very personal to me, and I've published, and I felt that I finished the journey. If you left your PhD and you hadn't got the answers that you asked at the beginning of your PhD, I think that would make it very, very difficult, because I think you need a bit of closure on something that's been such a large project and such a large endeavour in your life. I think that if I hadn't got that answer, I think it would have been a complete, it would have been tragic, I suppose, but I got my answer that I needed, so it was very satisfying, even if I didn't get a certificate.
So on the personal side, you think leaving a PhD early would be very difficult to look back on if you had unanswered answers?
Personally, if it's a project that it's just like, you know, there was a project available and you just took it, it wasn't personal, it was just a job, then yeah, whatever, you know, you just drop out of a PhD. And I've heard of people, you know, in different times going back and studying a PhD 3 times and not finishing it. I don't think that sounds very satisfying from my perspective. You know, people have, you know, decide, oh yeah, well, you know, the kid's coming, oh whoops, can't finish the PhD. That happens, or people take a break and that sort of stuff and then go back to it. I wouldn't say that that's the end of your PhD research or academic research if you decide to quit. Lots of things to consider.
Yeah, I took a 6-month leave of absence about halfway through and went and worked in the industry that my PhD was focused on. Then I came back. So I actually remember why did you start a PhD? So I started it to change industries and get a better job. So I had experience to work in the industry that I was being trained in, and then right near the end, so I'd basically finished my complete draft, and then the job I hadn't submitted though, and then the job came along, the job that I was looking for. So I told my supervisor I'm taking the job. She freaked out. You know, she held my PhD for 3 years. She didn't look at it for 3 years. And then, you know, and then she started looking at it, and, you know, 12 months later, it was all submitted and passed. But I mean, no, I'm sure you can tell from the stories here, nobody has a straight line from starting a PhD to finishing or even getting in. You know, I failed a whole semester in second year, you know, and it wasn't because I was, you know, there was just other challenges in my life that you know, that meant that the study went sort of as a secondary. So, you know, you're going to have lots of challenges, and I think what gets you through, I always say, smart people get into PhDs, but people with like tenacity finish them. It's very hard to finish a PhD, much easier to get in. So, you know, and look, and in some cases it's out of your hands, just things don't go the right way. But
yeah, it can also definitely be out of your hands. Yeah. All right. We've probably got time just to address the last 2 questions that are on. So apologies if anybody's got any extra questions that haven't yet posted, but we'll just address these last 2. And then we'll wind up for the session. So to do the first one, question from an anonymous attendee is, what extra skills can I learn during my PhD to make myself more job ready when I'm done?
One of the things that I come across occasionally with PhD students, they think that they've just got to do their coursework. And this is the same as undergraduates. They just think, oh, I just do the work, I answer the questions, I get full marks in my tests, and I get really good results in my you know, projects and things like that. But I think really it's what you do extra. And with my mentee at the moment, one of the big areas we're discussing is science communication. And you know, if you're writing an article for a publication, such as, you know, a RACI publication, that gets your name out there. It's not academic writing, it's not IMRAD style, but you're communicating the science. And I think that that's something that people need to think that they should do, that's extra to their coursework, that's really, really valuable outside there in their professional development.
Yeah, and I can agree with that in terms of not just communicating your work perhaps for a publication or a blog that you might be doing as part of your work, or a Twitter ability to communicate the technical to the non-technical. You're going to have bosses at some stage in your professional life, and your boss is not going to have the same PhD experience that what you do, and your ability to communicate what it is that you're doing to that person is definitely super important. Does anybody else have anything else to add to that, and potentially any views on networking or building relationships, or any of those other sort of softer skills that are probably not related specifically to chemistry?
I've got one thing to add. So as part of my role, there is a lot of conferences and seminars for wine industry, and specifically laboratories in the wine industry. one thing that's very important is networking during those seminars, meeting the other people who are working in those similar laboratories nearby, because you never know when you or them may have a question. You may be looking at a new testing method or a new instrument. You can actually put out feelers to other people in similar roles and say, hey, what are you using? What do you think of it? Can you help me? We've run out of chemicals. Do you have some to share? And you never know what's going to happen, and you can always get someone to give you a hand. At least in the wine industry, we find it might not be the same in other industries, but everyone's willing to pitch in when times are tough and help each other.
Thanks, Nadia.
I'd love to echo both Nadia and Kim's sentiments. I think science communication is something that is often overlooked in formal studies, at least when I was doing my undergrad and masters. And I think it's really crucial, not only at getting your name out there and increasing your potential job prospects, but also just for the sake of the science. You know, we shouldn't be doing science for the sake of science. It should be this doing science for the betterment of our community and our prosperity and everybody's health. And so certainly science communication really helps there. And definitely on the networking side, I know from my own experience, it can be very intimidating as a PhD student or as a master's student going to a conference and seeing the names of the people that you've been reading, of these tenured people or these people who have been in the game for a long time. You really don't feel like you can actually go up and ask them a question, but I certainly encourage you to do so. And you know, there are a couple of people who don't want to be answered. You know, they're riding on their own cloud up there, but they're not worth your time anyway. And the majority of people, especially those you know, professors who have been at it for a long time, would be delighted to have a coffee and a conversation with you, and then that just opens up new avenues. I think the other thing I'd add would be getting involved in professional societies. I joined the Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry as a PhD student, and then jumped on the board of that as a student representative. And I've been on the board for 9 years now, and it's been something that has really opened up lots of doors for me, but also has provided me with those soft skills of governance and, you know, budgets and how do we actually run a society, how do we run conferences, how do we do these other things, which certainly help build that CV with the non-traditional chemistry skills.
Thanks, Tom. All right, we will pop on to the last question that was up when I mentioned we're taking last two, and that was if somebody could give us a rundown of the typical day in the life of. Does anybody want to take that one up?
Oh, there we go. I'm a consultant, so the good thing about being a consultant is that I never do the same job twice. The bad thing is I never do the same job twice. So, you know, I've just trying to think. I've been out on all through the Pilbara on mine sites. I've been all through central Queensland. I've been out on boats sampling for the desal plant over in Perth. As I said, I got to work in London for a year. In the last 5 years, I've become a bit of almost like a world-leading knowledge in evaporation, because it's something that people don't really understand, especially engineers. That involved having a fight with the US Patent and Trademark Office, getting a patent through for my company, gotten 20 years of secured sales for something we'd developed. Dealing with the US EPA to get the product approved for use in 50 states in this, in America. So yeah, I don't have a typical day. Basically, somebody rings me up and says, "Hey, do you know about sequencing batch reactors?" And I go, "Of course I do." And then I go out and find out how they work, and so that I can send the guy a bill at the end of the day. But also, again, the idea of having a background in science and with a PhD, can research very, very rapidly. I'm very
looks like we're losing your
Don't,
signal a little bit.
Mate, what you know.
Sorry, Daniel, we might move on to somebody else just while you appear to be having some connection problems. Would anybody like to make a final comment?
I can do a typical day in my job, but again, it's very similar where it changes day to day based on what is happening. Typical day, you might go into work, see how the instruments are operating, how methods are operating. Is there any problems? You might have to do preventative maintenance on some of the equipment. You may review data, looking at control charts, analysing data. You might be running trials where you're getting in samples and doing specific analysis or testing a new instrument. You may be setting up documents for just generic day-to-day records. You may be preparing for audits. You could be going out to another site and visiting a winery and looking at their labs, what's happening in their side of the world. You could just be dealing with emails. You never know what it is. You might end up getting called out and going to a completely different site somewhere else and doing some one-off random testing that's something I'd probably say custom testing based on a customer's requirement. But again, it changes every day. It's not necessarily the same.
Yeah, it's safe to say that not all industry jobs, even though you might have lab tech or lab assistant in your name, aren't necessarily all in the lab. Thank you very much for your time to everybody listening. Got some good insight and was able to ask some pertinent questions and get some insights. I'll just hand back now to Renata to finish up and give a last comment from RACI.
Yep, thank you, Nathan. Thank you so much to everyone. I won't keep you all too much longer. I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists, Nadia, Kim, Tom and Daniel, for giving up your time this afternoon and for being so open with us. Thank you, Nathan, for putting your hand up to moderate another panel for the Young Chemists. And just lastly, thanks to the Young Chemists Committee for helping plan this event. And thank you, Dave, for the technical support this afternoon. And I think that's about it from me.